Hey, this is Don Davis, and I'm going to go over how to create an IRB at Georgia State University. Um, this is June 30th, 2015, and we're currently using the imedris system. So, to get into that account, you'll need to have completed your city training. The other thing that would be helpful is for you to have a Qualtrics account set up in your name so that you can manage your surveys, and then you'll be able to share those with me from there. Um, so the first step, we have a lot of examples of IRBs, and there's no reason to start from scratch because a lot of the wording has already been used and approved. So the best strategy is to go to the Google Drive IRB folder and find an example of a protocol that's similar to what you're going to do. So let's just assume you're going to use an online survey. Um, so IRB folder. So we talked about potentially planning a study related to spiritual coping with the tragedy that occurred recently in Charleston. So what I did is I went into the approved GSU and I found a prior study on intergroup forgiveness, and I used these forms and kind of copy and pasted them one at a time and tweaked them for the purposes of this IRB. So for the consent form, um, it basically involves changing the title, tweaking the number of participants, how long the study takes, and then there's a statement about the purpose of the study, as well as what's specifically going to be in the survey. So, like any kind of inclusion exclusion criteria, what the purpose of the study is, and what kind of measures are in the survey. A lot of this wording can stay about the same, although you might have minor tweaks to the wording based on the purpose of the study. Um, and often this confidentiality statement is pretty similar, although there might be some slight differences in the kind of information you're asking for permission to have. So sometimes you may not necessarily ask for name and email. If we're doing something like in the lab, we may need to describe how we're going to protect, for example, like videos. But for most of this, we have examples that have already been approved, and that's the easiest way to handle it. Um, so the recruiting materials is pretty straightforward. Just a real short statement that gets posted, in this case on Sona. And then I usually just copy and paste this description from the consent form procedures. Um, the research protocol, I usually try to keep this really bare bones. You can see this is really short. I copy and pasted this data management section. I refer to measures in the measurement packet. I've got a brief statement on what's going to happen, how we're going to get participants. And I usually will just copy and paste these elements from prior papers. So there's a little. I've written 5 or 6 paragraphs for the study rationale, and I've increasingly tried to get shorter and shorter versions, and they've approved something as short as this. So unless they ask for more, I usually give them as little as possible. Um, it's weird, like when I first got here, they didn't even require this. It's really redundant with other parts, but there's some kind of weird thing where NIH requires a research protocol or something weird where they added it, and from my perspective, there's not much purpose to it. But grants often have a protocol associated, so the IRB requires a research protocol. Um, So what I don't have, I haven't created the survey yet for this, but how you would do that is you would go into Qualtrics, and we can kind of go over how to navigate Qualtrics and create surveys at a different time. But assuming that your survey is already made, you can go to advanced options, export to Word, and they're fine with you just providing this exported survey. It's not perfectly formatted, but they seem to be okay with that. Just for the purpose of review. Yeah, so those are the different parts. And then this for proofing form right here, this is all the information that you need to enter into imedris. And it's such a pain to deal with that system because it's like point and click and you have to save everything to move to the next section. So what I've found is it's easier just to go ahead and edit and make your changes in this form and then go in once, and it takes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes to kind of click through and enter this information. But when I was doing this morning, I changed the title, made a tweak to the purpose. Almost everything else stayed exactly the same. So it took me almost no time to just make tweaks to this. So I think you'll find after you do 2 or 3 of these that it can actually be really quick just to get the forms together. And the part that tends to take a little more time is just kind of putting thought into what you're actually going to put into the survey and creating that survey. So that kind of covers this first part, as well as step 3, adjusting each of these forms. And the final step is you go to the imedris website, log in, and it takes some getting used to. So add a study. I already kind of created this one, so I'm going to go back into my draft. And holy. So it takes some time to kind of get used to navigating the system, but it starts you out at general information and then walks you through each of these different modules. And then this is what it looks like when it's kind of all filled in. But this generally, the numbers aren't exactly the same, but it generally corresponds with this for proofing form. And so I went through and just kind of filled out the different sections. There are parts that are a little bit of a pain, like you have to go in and kind of add in each person, you add the user, and then you can search for their name and save it. But you kind of go through and you click through the different options, and then it lets you add in your supplemental forms. You can either add them one at a time or all together. And then you click this and sign off and submit, and that's it.